Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. Recognizing life's paradoxical nature is essential for our emotional health and personal growth. After all, opposites depend on each other. One can't exist without the other. Consider this for a minute. How can one truly understand happiness without experiencing sadness? The contrasting elements that color our lives are not problems to be solved, but rather an invitation to accept the seamless flow of existence. Or so says our guest today, Prashanthi Amarnath, the author of the new book, Embracing Paradox. Dive into a mystical adventure with the Tao Te Ching through 81 enchanting micro lessons. Prashanthi is a spiritual seeker whose work blends philosophical insight with practical guidance for modern life. Raised in a home that embraced multiple belief systems, she developed an early appreciation for introspection and openness. Prashanthi holds an engineering degree in information technology and balances a full-time career in her field with family life and her ongoing study of spirituality, especially the teachings of the Tao Te Ching and Sri Satya Sai Baba. Now based in Charlotte, North Carolina, Prashanthi lives with her husband, their daughter, and their beloved cat. She never misses an opportunity to spend time outdoors where she feels most at peace. Hello, Prashanthi, and welcome to the Pathway Show.
Thank you, Paul. It truly is an honor to be here with you today on Pathways Radio and knowing the kind of voices that have sat with you before, especially Ramdas and Wayne Dyer, makes this moment even more meaningful. Like I said, my name is Prashanthi. I'm the author of Embracing Paradox, a book inspired by the timeless wisdom of the Tao Te Ching. I often say that I'm not a traditional author, and I'm certainly not a Taoist scholar. My journey started as a longing to understand the vast, all pervasive consciousness that just moves through everything. And what really drew me to Tao is its formlessness, its mystery, its quiet truth. The moment you try to define it, it just slips through the fingers of language, and somehow that just made it feel home for me. And there's a
Uh-huh.
paradox, right, that shaped my life
Y-
and my
y-
work, that
Yeah,
everyone is living inside their own reality,
yeah.
whether where they
Well,
are the main character of the story.
you fairly recently came to Taoism. I mean, like within the last 2 or 3 years, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was very very recent. So my research process of for embracing paradox was a little different from what people might expect. I didn't approach the Tao Te Ching as a scholar. I wasn't trying to produce a traditional academic translation. Instead, my process was a blend of deep listening, spiritual inquiry, and engaging with the spirit of the text rather than dissecting its language itself. So I
It's
read.
I was just going to say it's so amazing that your book is very large and it's it's a big book and to have written a book like that to take the normal person 5 years. So it's really amazing, and you must have really become enraptured by the by Taoism and the Tao Te Ching. And I'm wondering, which translation did you depend on in terms of, like, your book is divided up in these different parts.
Right.
Um, First you have the text from the Tao Te Ching,
Mhm,
and then you
mhm.
have your own commentary on it, and some practices uh, that you recommend, and some autobiographical stuff related to your practice, inspired by the Tao Te Ching. But the original, what translation did you go with for the basic original text?
So I did read multiple translation to
Right,
understand the wide range of interpretations that already exist today. Everything from a more poetic versions to literal line by line translations. I
right.
noticed how much variance was there between them, Paul, which actually reassured me that the Tao isn't meant to be pinned down to a single authoritative meaning. But the most meaningful part of my research wasn't in the books that I was reading, the translations that I was reading. It was in my own inner experience. I would sit with a verse for days and sometimes weeks until something in me softened or opened. So when I would read multiple translations and I would understand and sit with it and try to write my own translation of what it meant, or what Lao Tzu meant. Because classical Chinese is incredibly compact and each character just carries layers of meaning,
Right.
imagery, philosophy. So I was like, I let the simplicity just guide me. I allowed the metaphor, the rhythm, and the silence to teach me from within. You could say like
Yes.
my approach was more contemplative than academic. And I
You know,
also drew from my
that
upbringing.
that's so interesting because I've had a similar experience. I'm a Western I Ching author, and I studied so many different versions of the I Ching. And I don't translate Chinese, but I created a version I call the Visionary I Ching, which
Mm.
it's been out since 1989, and it's now an app. So it's kind of the same process. I went through the same process, but I don't think I went through it as deeply as you did. I mean, wow, you are something else. You are like a living mystic. So
Oh,
tell us,
God.
how do you understand the Tao? How do you understand it, and how can you share that with our audience?
Right before, I want to say a little bit about your app. I actually have the app with me and I love it. And I
Oh
just love
God,
it every time it brings the right message to me at the right time. I don't know how you
wow,
did it, Paul. It's so
that's
amazing.
awesome. That is so
It's amazing.
well. Thank you. I
All right.
appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, of course. So when people hear the word Tao, right, they often want to know. They're curious. They want to know a definition for it, and that's where the difficulty begins because the Tao is not something you define. The moment you try to capture it in words, it slips away, Paul. And Tao Te Ching opens with the warning, right? The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao.
Right,
That line
right.
alone just tells everything we need to know, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
it's
Yeah,
funny.
but
It's
yet you write a huge book about it. That's a
it's
paradox. N-
I am so grateful
n-
that you brought this up. It truly is a paradox that me
yeah,
writing a
so
book about.
now, but your book is so expansive,
Mm.
and how should people use it? You know, do you expect them to read it all the way through, or to open it like stickomancy, where they, just open it and the right verse pops up for them? What do you suggest?
I suggest them do what you said, like how I use the app. Well, that's such a clever way to use and for people to gain the knowledge. It's easier to
Hmm.
share this way in little snippets at the right time that they need through an app, and that's exactly how I want the to work. And that's why I have not released the e-version of the book, Paul, because I want people to hold it. I want them to hold it in a hand. Of course, your app does exactly the same, but digitally, which is very smart. But I want them to hold the book. I want them to open a random page and read what it says, and
Okay.
the message meet them exactly at where they are at that point in life.
Right. So the title of your book is Embracing Paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Paradox is like a central theme. And you have said that everything in the Tao Te Ching is about paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so why don't we unpack the word paradox to people who've never studied Taoism before?
Of course. So, paradox is a very funny term. The way that I decided to name the book "Embracing Paradox" when I read the Tao Te Ching, it wasn't talking to me in direct words. It was just throwing me things like uncarved wood. I'm like, what is uncarved wood? Like, how do I define an uncarved wood to my child? So that's where I started looking into the meaning behind each of these little metaphors that Lao Tzu had used. So there is one verse that talks about straw dogs, and I specifically looked into what a straw dog is. And a straw dog is something that Chinese culture they use them as a part of their ritual. And after the ritual, they leave the straw dog away. It just stays and people walk on it. People just it served its purpose and it's gone. So when I was contemplating, when I was sitting with it, and what I could relate to the modern day world was the pinata. Then I wrote about that, how a pinata at that moment served as a paradox to teach me in a very practical way rather than an academic way. So
Hmm.
I started understanding paradox at a very practical level rather than understanding like paradox was something that I need to follow like a rule book. It
Why do
became
you,
mhm.
why do you think paradox is an effective framework for navigating modern life?
Paradox doesn't allow you to choose either this or that.
Hmm.
Paradox says live exactly where you are in that middle ground, and that is where your your life becomes so an example to live and for people to understand from a lived and embodied knowledge rather than something to talk about. So when I talk about paradoxes as a form of wisdom, is that it's pointing to the fact that the truth doesn't live in extremes. It lives in a space where the opposites meet. Paradox
Right.
is powerful because it just breaks the mind's addiction to certainty. We're conditioned to believe that something has to be either this or that, strong or soft, spiritual or non spiritual, confident or afraid. But Tao teaches the opposite. Life is always both. Softness
Right.
contains the strength, stillness contains the moment, fear can coexist with trust.
You use the term authentic self quite a bit, and you make the point that being one's authentic self is paradoxical. Can you unpack that?
that is that is absolutely true because the Tao doesn't favor the good and does not favor the bad. The Tao is the same for everybody. So, what our brain does constantly is analyze, am I good? Am I bad? It just tries to label what that feeling is or what the action that I'm going to perform is. So when you let go of that, because there's no point in doing that because God, Tao, Brahman, consciousness, they all are pointing to the fact that just be authentic. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter what is right or what is wrong because what is right in your perspective could be completely wrong in another person's perspective. So there's no point in labeling. The best thing, the way how we honor, like how Ramdas says, be here now. Just be here now and show up with your true, authentic self, and that would
Right.
do wonders.
Hmm. So, do you think that Taoism's ancient principles are particularly relevant today? Are they more relevant than ever, or is uh, or not?
No, so the Tao never asks us to escape the world because it's modern. It asks us to move through it lightly. And simplicity, right, in Taoism is not about having less for the sake of it. It's about removing what interferes with our natural flow. And in the modern world, filled with noise and speed and constant stimulation, simplicity just becomes a quiet spiritual practice. And that's why we would have to try and reduce that inner noise before the outer noise because the Tao teaches that the simplicity just begins from within before
Uh-huh.
decluttering your home or schedule and notice where you're mentally overloading yourself like too many options, comparisons, future projections, they create complexity. So practice pausing your thoughts instead of adding new ones, and there are many ways where we could control our inner noise and we could
Yeah.
still say simple.
You compare spirituality
Hmm.
with self-help, and you talk about practicing spirituality as part of your day job. But what is the difference between spiritual growth and conventional self help?
So they are the same. The only difference I see in the self-help world is they're always pushing you to be something, pushing you to be somewhere. You have to
Right.
be consistent. If you do this for 21 days, you will achieve your goal. That's what the self-help says. But Tao doesn't say that. Tao says be where you are, be comfortable, be authentic. And
Yeah.
world, they hate that, right? They're like, no, don't be yourself. Wake up at 5 o'clock. Force yourself to wake up at 5 o'clock, 5 a.m. in the morning.
Right.
But
Be better.
be better. Yeah, it's so easy, right? Be better. Yeah, of course. I'm
Y-
trying. Clearly.
yeah. It's constant pressure, right?
It
Uh,
is. It is.
Now, you talk about
Totally.
the observer state, and you
Yeah.
say that Taoism guides us to go even beyond the observer. So, what is the observer state, and what does going beyond look like?
So, in an observer state, I talk a lot about this in the book as well. And when we think that things are happening to us, and that happening is because of an action that you had performed, that complicates everything because that makes you the doer. You
Right.
assume that you are the doer, but in reality you're not the doer. You're not you're you get go to a state into an observer. At that point, that observer state is is someone relinquishing their control of the moment and trusting that whatever is happening to them at that point is is just the way that it is meant to happen, and that where they are is just where they're meant to be at that moment. And it's having that trust, and that trust comes from knowing that everything around is controlled by this Tao, this power, the Brahman, the God, the universe. And when that power has so much potential to control universes, to control the cell expansion in our body, and all of that in between, how could you
Hmm.
not trust that power?
Right.
Doesn't trust
Well,
become natural at that point?
it's pretty easy to um, feel despondent or a sense of despair these days, that to question the goodness of life, considering all the terrible things that are happening to the environment and to the society. So Taoism offers, I don't know if it's hope, but this whole concept of learning how to accept, go beyond observing. Observing is sort of kind of a form of doing. Um, but you're talking about being. And I think that's one of the lessons of Taoism, right? Is about, like you say, be here now.
There
Just
now, yeah.
just let it be.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we talk about awakening or self-inquiry, right, most parts encourage us to become that observer, to step back from thoughts, emotions, that identity, and that simply witness. But that's an important step, right? But in Taoism, that is not the final step. The observer
Right.
is still a position. It's still a subtle form of separation, a me watching a thing, right? But the Tao invites us to something even more spacious, the dissolving of the observer altogether. In the Tao, reality is not divided into the one who sees and things that are being seen. Tao is the
Hmm.
field where seeing happens without a seer, and breath
Uh-huh.
happens without a breather. Life moves without a controller, and the observer state is clarity. But dissolution of that observer state, that is the freedom. And think
Yeah.
of it this way, right? When you observe your thoughts, you're no longer lost in them. Good, but but then the observer dissolves. The boundary between you and the life just disappears, and there's only the moment of the Tao itself. And that is what Laozi means when he points us beyond naming, beyond definitions, beyond fixed identity. He's not asking us to detach from life. He's asking us to merge with life. And
Right.
in that merging, there is an awareness. But
Right.
know someone owning it, there's love, but no self holding it or withholding it. There is action, but there is no actor, right? That's constantly gripping to the outcome, and that is Wu Wei at its deepest. Not just
Yeah.
like an effortless action, but an action arising from that place.
That's the paradox. I think that's the paradox of Taoism is that self improvement just kind of depends on stopping the effort, stopping trying, stopping the identification with the concept of a better self. And I love the way your work brings that out. But let's talk about Wu Wei and how do we practice that in everyday situations?
Yeah, and when people hear about Wu Wei, that's again another paradox in itself. It just translates to to effortless action. It's one of the most misunderstood ideas in Taoism, right?
Right, right.
And they hear laziness and people are like passivity, doing nothing, giving up. But Wu Wei has nothing to do with disengaging from life. In fact, Wu Wei is about engaging so fully and so honestly that effort becomes unnecessary. That's hard for modern culture to hear because we
For
live in a
sure.
world that's that celebrates pushing, striving, optimizing, and forcing outcomes. And we are taught that effort equals value, and that exhaustion is a proof of commitment, and that if something isn't hard, it must not matter. But Wu
Right.
Wei quietly challenges all of that, right? Effortless action doesn't mean no action; it means right action.
You know, yeah, it's such a paradox. And, it's like, I'm wondering, how do you feel that the Tao helps us hold difficult emotions without drowning in them?
Yeah, that kind of needs courage, right?
Right.
You have to act from the place of that inner stillness instead of that inner urgency. And honestly, when action is aligned, it often looks simple from the outside, but it carries tremendous power, like water carving a stone, right? Not through force, but through consistency and timing. And Wu Wei is such an effective tool for that. It teaches us that most effective actions often feel less dramatic. So when explaining effortless action today, I say this: Wu Wei is learning to stop making tension for progress, and it's learning to trust that when you are internally aligned, your actions becomes precise, timely, and impactful. And what more do you need leading a successful and peaceful life than that, Paul? You
Yeah,
you
right.
wanna you wanna not try harder, right? You wanna be in alignment.
We're rapidly running out of time on this all too short program, but I want to ask you: has there been a moment in your life when embracing paradox directly changed the outcome of a difficult decision or conflict?
Every single day, every single day. So even me coming here and talking about Tao and presenting myself with all my flaws, the complete me, the open raw me. I'm a very discreet person. I'm hardly on social media or anything like that. For me to come out and show myself out here and talk, I had to fight a lot with myself, and that's the paradox I had to fight to come and be here. I didn't want to feel like I was monetizing spirituality. Me coming out here and talking and trying to sell my book, I just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do, and I'm still fighting it. And that's the paradox that I'm facing, and I'm being honest with it. I'm holding space for it, and just I'm not taking action. I'm in alignment with Wu Wei, and doing as minimum, as natural as possible, as organic as possible. I'm letting things just arise on its own and not pushing my agenda on. Um,
Yeah, I appreciate your
mhm.
honesty, and the way that you model personal authenticity. It's beautiful, and it's reflected in your book. And I hope a lot of people buy your book. But be that as it may, you're a great example, and you're gonna make a website, right? It's not quite up yet, but
It's not, but we're building it. My I got someone from UK to build a beautiful website for me, so it's amazing. I've seen the preview; it looks great. So I
hmm
can't wait. I can't wait for it to be released in
hmm
probably in a week or so. most likely.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, how should people get a hold of you if they or your work? How can they find you, or should they just Google your name?
No, I have a link to my book in Amazon. I have the book on
Oh,
Amazon, so
okay. Uh-huh.
I can provide the link. And the
Okay.
website will be up very soon, very soon.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's definitely a contact page on the website where people can reach out to me.
Okay. One more question
Mhm.
before we have to go.
Yeah,
You are optimistic about the future, right?
very much so. We've seen the worst, Paul. It has to get better, right? So I mean, we're don't you think so? I mean,
It
it's
seems like it's getting worse and worse every day.
no, the one of the most important Taoist teachings is that there's nothing is bad in itself.
Okay, that's a good reminder. Wow. Well, I'm going to go back and read more of your book so I can relax in the present moment. And there's so much more what you and I could explore,
Mhm,
but we
mhm.
have run out of time on Pathways today. And I want to thank you for so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Paul.
And for those who may be listening to Pathways live on a Sunday morning and have tuned in late, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, producer of the visionary Ching Oracle, an app that supports great decisions and perfect timing. And we're so glad you are with us today. Please note that you have the ability to review hundreds of interviews in our online archive at divination.com. And you can play or share this program whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Prashanthi Amarnath, author of Embracing Paradox. Dive into a mystical adventure with the Tao Te Ching through 81 enchanting micro lessons. And I encourage you to look it up on Amazon and go to her website when it comes out. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of you listeners for tuning in to Pathways, which is currently broadcast on KBOO FM in Portland, Oregon. And you can get a free subscription to our podcast, which you can also find at divination.com. That's spelled DIVI nation.com, or by searching Pathways Radio on Paulo's YouTube channel, where you can give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Feel free to forward a link to your friends. And this is Paulo bidding you adieu and reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways podcasts. And thanks again to Prashanthi Amarnath and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.